Hello everyone and welcome to another mini sky tonight. So I have a neighbor who has been watching some of my videos and he decided to come over to ask me a couple questions. Now we kept social distance, but he asked me about ideas for telescopes. He has a daughter he would love to be able to get an awesome birthday gift for because her birthday's coming up and she wants to get into the sciences. And so he thought the best thing to do was to get her a small little telescope. And he knew I was in the neighborhood and wanted to know what kind of telescopes he would get for her birthday. So some of the information I share with him, I wanted to share with you folks and to give you a rough idea of what to look for in terms of telescopes. Now, telescopes are a great tool. The great thing about observational astronomy is it can be both a hobby and a profession. So you can have anywhere from the simple to the most complex, depending upon what you want. So like there's many different hobbies such as gardening, knitting, woodworking, automotive restoration, and so on. There's different types of hobbies, so you can get into it as basic as you want or as complex as you want. So it just depends upon how much you want to invest into it. So before you start going out and looking at different telescopes, I wanted to give you a bit of a history into the telescope as well as what to expect and what the mechanics are for a telescope before you consider buying one. Because chances are if you go to a professional website, you're going to run into a lot of different terms and things like that. So I wanted to give you some of the basics of what to look for. So first off, why do we need a telescope? I mean, sadly, we're kind of all stuck in quarantine and the best thing we can do is just simply go outside and look up at the stars. Well, it has to deal with the limits of our eye. So here I've got a beautiful picture of an eye and kind of like the basic idea of what an eye is. So you have your cornea, which is the cover over your eye. You have the pupil, which is the opening to your eye. You have the iris, which is the colors of your eyes. You have the lens and the retina and the optic nerve. So the great thing about our eye is that it's practically a mini telescope. The lens is similar to like the lenses in telescopes. So you have a little miniature telescope in your eye. Problem is that your eye can only gather so much light given the little hole that it does process, and it can't process light that is very faint. So how does the eye work? Well, your pupil opens and closes to allow certain amounts of light in depending upon how bright it is in the room or in the area. A way you can test this is allow yourself to go into like a dark room with a mirror, wait for a few seconds, and then turn on a flashlight, and then you will notice on your pupil, it will dilate. That's because when it's in a dark room, it opens up to allow more light in so it can be able to see things. And then when there is a bright light source, the pupil dilates to allow less light in. Because all this light is being focused back to your retina. So as you can see in the image right here, I have a picture of a tree that's basically being focused back to the back of your eye. So when that happens, all that information that goes to the back of your eye hits the optic nerve, and then the optic nerve goes into your brain, and your brain processes what you see. But notice something peculiar with this image. The image is upside down. That's because the lens flips the image. The weird thing about optics is that it flips the image when it goes through an object, when the light goes through the lens. So therefore, the image that you see is technically upside down in the back of your eye. But your eye then takes the information through the optic nerve up into your brain, and then your brain automatically flips it for you. So needless to say, we have a powerful telescope in our eyes, but it's not quite powerful. In fact, the lowest magnification or the lowest magnitude that we can see in the sky is a magnitude 5 star, which is pretty faint, but not faint as some of the deep sky objects that we can see through a telescope. So let's look at how the telescope began. So many people believe that Galileo was the first person to invent the telescope. False. It is complete myth. The first person to create a quote-unquote telescope, or as he called it, a spyglass, was Hans Lippershey, or Hans Lippershey, as I've heard from other people. I don't speak Dutch, so I apologize for my bad pronunciation, but he was the first person to take a series of lenses in a tube and use the new contraption to look towards the horizons in a ship. So it was used as a spyglass to be able to see things that are far off away much closer. It was Galileo who then took the design and compounded on it and then used it for astronomy. So he was really technically the first telescope astronomer. So he didn't invent the telescope, but he used the telescope to look up in the sky and saw a multitude of different things through his telescope. In fact, the two images near the top, the one on the left was the telescope by Galileo, was one of the first telescopes by Hans Lippershey, and the telescope to the right was Galileo's telescope. The second telescope that came into existence, and it's the one that we use today, is called the Kepler telescope, and it basically Johannes Kepler took the telescope and improved the model from Galileo and created a series of lenses in the tube. Kepler's design is still used today. In fact, the picture on the bottom is Kepler's telescope. As you can see, it's incredibly long. The more lenses that you add, the longer it's going to be, and needless to say, it's going to weigh a lot. So imagine trying to put that into your backyard. Not easy. But fortunately, the astronomer royal came to the rescue because he was the first person to take mirrors instead of lenses in a telescope. He created the first reflecting telescope. So you have two different types of telescopes. Refracting, which is a series of lenses as mentioned by Kepler's design, because the term refract means to bend. So it's a series of lenses similar to what you use in your eyeglasses if you have a pair, that bends the light in such a way to where it can come to a focus and that your eye can process it. Whereas in a reflector takes the light and bounces it off a series of mirrors. Yep. So let's take a look at some of those optics. So in the series of lenses, what happens is that you have an object on the far side and the light from it goes through the lens, but then gets flipped upside down. Because light bends in glass. And in fact, a cool trick that you can do to test that light bends in different medium is if you take a pencil and put it in a glass filled with water, you'll notice that the pencil looks bent. Even though it's not really bent, it looks bent. That's just because the light bends in water. And so it looks like the light, even though it's supposed to come at a straight angle, looks like it's at a curved angle. That's kind of what's going on here with the lenses, is the light goes through the lens and then gets curved and bounces downward. So when you look at an object, it'll look like it's upside down. There are two types of lenses, convex and concave. I always remember concave is that it looks like a huge cave, like to cave inward sort of thing. And you can have a different series of different lenses to basically get the image to where you want it to be. So that was refracting. This is reflecting. So instead of using a series of lenses, you use a curved mirror. Now, a convex mirror is basically one that's curved outward. So in the case of the image to the right, that's a convex mirror. You usually see convex mirrors like in gas stations in the top right corner, or you see convex mirrors in like grocery stores when you're going towards the checkout. You kind of see a convex mirror to your right. many cashiers use that to look down to see if there's anything at the bottom of your cart in case you miss something. So basically the whole point of the convex mirror is to allow objects that are like farther downward or upward to be able to come into view. Whereas in a concave mirror, kind of like I said, if it looks like a cave, chances are it's concave. So whereas in a concave mirror, which is on the left, basically allows all the light to be pointed down to a single point. So these are the two different types of telescopes we're working with. And these are usually the two that you see in the market today. The one on the left is called a refracting telescope, which is a series of lenses. And the telescope to the right is a reflecting telescope, which uses a series of lenses where you have a curved mirror at the back end that reflects it off to a series of mirrors into the eyepiece. Now there's different types of reflecting types of telescopes, but we can just stick with the basic. Let's just use Newton's telescope, for example. In fact, the telescope to the right is often called a Newtonian telescope. So what will you see when you look into a telescope and through the eyepiece? You will notice that the image is flipped and upside down. And that's okay, that's how it is designed. Because as we talked about with the ray tracing, because it's being bent in through the lenses, the object will become flipped in different directions. And that's okay, you just have to imagine the object is flipped and upside down, and it's okay. And so what you will see with this, like for example, if you have the first incoming image over to the right, the final image will look like it's flipped and upside down. So we have these two types of telescopes. What's the best type of telescope to use? Well, here's some pros and cons for different types of telescopes. It depends upon what you're trying to use it for. If you're just looking at basic objects like bright objects like planets and stuff, a refractor is great for that. It's also used great for far off distant objects that are easy to see during the daytime. So like if you're trying to look for a bird hunting or something like that, you can use a refracting telescope to get the image much more sharp and clear. They're also easy to clean. Since many refracting telescopes only have one or two surfaces you have to worry about, they're easier to clean. The problem is that they're difficult to support. You usually have to put the support beam in the center. And the bigger and heavier the telescope is, the more support you're going to have, so that way it doesn't sag or bend. And it can only get so large because, in fact, the largest refracting telescope has a 1 meter diameter. And the reason being is because the sheer weight of the glass that is in the tubes is causing the telescope to bend. And so you can only get so big without having to have multiple support systems. And you also get this effect known as chromatic aberration. Now, remember when I mentioned with the lenses that light bends, it also spreads out into its many colors. If you've seen a prism before, it's basically this little triangular pyramid type of object that many people would get at a science fair, and you take it over to the window, and just at the right time of day when the sun shines through it, it will bounce a rainbow over to the other side of the wall. Well, the same thing goes on with lenses, because at the tips of the lenses, they act like mini prisms. So the light that's hitting at the tips of the lenses is spreading the light out into its many colors. So when you look at an image of an object, sometimes you get what is known as chromatic aberration, to where you get little mini rainbows on the edges of your object. So like here I have an example of Jupiter with a huge amount of chromatic aberration, where you see like a blue and a red rainbow around it. But onto reflectors. Reflectors are supported from the back end, so you can have as much weight as possible, and they're supported from the back rather than in the middle. And they're great for faint objects. Many Newtonian telescopes are often referred to as light buckets because the bigger the light bucket is, the more light comes in. And so for the fainter objects that are hard to see, the more light it can gather, the better the view you're going to get. Assuming, of course, that you're far away from city lights and there's no moon and things like that. And they can get very large. In fact, I think due to the new technology of multi-mirror telescopes, they have gotten several meters in diameter. But however, the only problem is that the coating is delicate on these mirrors. This is not your standard mirror that you can get at a nearby hardware store. These are especially coated with a certain type of material that makes it easy to reflect. And this special coating can't just be simply cleaned with like Windex or something. That removes the coating. So you have to have special equipment to be able to clean it. So no accidentally putting your finger on it and making smudges or anything of that nature. So let's talk about some famous big telescopes. Like, as I mentioned, this is the Yerkes Observatory, which houses the largest refracting telescope. It had the 1 meter diameter lens. As you will notice, it's huge, it's long. So yeah, you don't want something big in your backyard. And as you'll notice in the image, it's supported in the center, but notice it has kind of a bit of a curve to it. It's a faint little curve, but a curve. That's because the sheer weight of the glass in these tubes is causing the telescope itself to curve or bend or sag underneath the weight. So hence why refractors can only get so big. Whereas in Mount Palomar was the largest reflecting telescope for a single mirror of its time. That was before it was usurped by other telescopes, like for example, the Keck Telescope, which has several multi-mirror, it's a multi-mirror telescope and it's gotten several meters in diameter. And then of course you have these new space telescopes. The Hubble Space Telescope was a beautiful reflector. And then you have the James Webb Telescope that is hopefully in March of 2021 going to be launched. So keep your fingers crossed. I know with this whole COVID mess, a lot of things have been pushed back. So hopefully they will try to keep on track. On the plus side, many of the guys that are in these clean rooms are guaranteed to be really, really clean. So the question becomes then, why do we need observatories or telescopes on the ground? Because after all, we have the James Webb Telescope that's going to be put into service, and we have the Hubble Space Telescope, as well as a series of other different types of observatories up in our atmosphere and in the orbit around the Earth. Well, that is partially true. We couldn't have been able to use some of these telescopes that are on the ground because of our beautiful atmosphere. Our atmosphere scatters light. In fact, I like to think of our atmosphere as like looking at a light at the bottom of a choppy pool. You know how stars twinkle when you look at them? Well, that's because our atmosphere is causing that light to twinkle. Stars shine with a steady light, but it's the pulsating and the motion of our atmosphere that causes it to pulsate or to twinkle. So hence the old nursery rhyme, twinkle, twinkle, little star. So this kind of gets annoying because if you want a good stable image, it's really hard to get a good stable image of the star if it's constantly being fluttered by our atmosphere. Fortunately, several brilliant astronomers came up with a technique that can compensate for this. That technique is called adaptive optics, to where they shine a laser up into the sky far enough, high enough to where it can penetrate through the upper parts of our atmosphere. And they take images of the laser beam because they know the wavelength and the frequency of the laser beam and what it's supposed to look like. And then they can compare that standard image with an image of what it looks like through our atmosphere, and then take the compensations for that using computer programs and apply that filter into the stars. So, for example, the image on the left is what the cluster of stars would look like without adaptive optics. So as you can see, it's completely blurry, that all because due to our atmosphere. But the image to the right is with adaptive optics. So as you can see perfectly clear indicators of individual stars. So this technique saved a lot of observatories, and hence why we're able to still have observatories down on the ground. So those are the basics of telescopes. So on to the pitch. What telescope should I buy my budding astronomer, or what can I get for my perfect interest to be able to go out and take a look at different objects? Well, take a look at some of these factors that to consider before you choose a telescope. One, what's your budget? Like I mentioned before, astronomy is a great hobby, and you can go as little as you want or as much as you want. So it depends upon what your budget is. I've seen telescopes that are as cheap as like $20 from Walmart, but I've also seen telescopes that are on the far expensive end that are over $5,000. So it just depends upon what you're trying to do and what your budget is. Second thing just to figure out is how much are you planning to use it? Is this going to be a telescope that you take out as often as you can with your family, or is it going to be a part of a hobby where you can categorize different M objects or do some astrophotography, or is this going to be a once in a lifetime, take it out of the attic and pull it out and then put it back in the attic for another year? So how often are you going to use it? Because if you're going to invest money into this, you want to be able to use it quite often. My policy is I like to think of objects in my house as, okay, this object is taking up space, so therefore it has to pay rent. Am I using this object enough to where it's earning its rent? Next thing, what do you want to see? Do you want to just see some of the basic planets and stuff, or do you want to see some of the deep sky objects? What are you hoping to be able to see? Because the more detailed of objects you want to see, the higher the price goes. Also, take a look at some of these other limitations that many parents, when they buy a telescope for their kid, sometimes don't take into consideration. One, do you have proper storage? Often I've had parents who come in and they said, yeah, we got this telescope and we have no place to put it, and they donate it to the center, and then we have to find out how to properly use it. And for many of these poor parents, they live in an apartment, and so they don't have a lot of space to store stuff. Also, keep in mind accessories. Yeah, you can buy a telescope, but you also have to buy eyepieces, you have to buy a spotting scope and things like that. So how many accessories do you want to get with this telescope? So that's going to affect the cost as well. Also, weight and size. I can't count the number of times I had parents complain of having to haul telescopes because they were just so bulky and weighty. And eventually they couldn't haul them anymore because they had physical problems, like they could no longer lift heavy things anymore, and or just because it was so heavy they accidentally dropped it. So keep in mind weight and size could be an issue too. So with these in mind, it gives you a kind of like a rough basis to what to look for when if you want to do your own personal search. But given what I've researched thus far, and if you're looking for a basic introductory telescope, here are 3 that I would recommend. That they're relatively lightweight, they're easy to store and to carry, and they're easy to set up. That's always a good bonus. And these are from 3 trustable companies that I have worked with in the past, as well as they have reputable customer service. Now with the COVID-19, it's kind of flaky because even some of the telescope companies have had to go on skeleton crews. So just bear with them, but I know that if you toss them emails and stuff, they are more than happy to answer your questions. So the first one off the bat is a Star Navigator. It's a refractor telescope, and it comes with a couple of different lenses, and it has an easy setup tripod. That's one of the things I appreciated about this telescope, is the tripod not having so many knobs or twists or anything of that nature. It just has a couple little clamps, and you just set it up, clamp, and you're set up and ready to go. The next two are reflectors, and the reason being why I chose these particular two is that they're relatively lightweight and they are relatively small in size. So if you have a young budding astronomer, these are great telescopes to be able just to simply take out, set up. You can literally put these on a small table. That's what makes them so great, and they're easy, portable as well. So they can range roughly around about $350 to $300, give or take what you're trying to look for. So when you're trying to look for these particular telescopes or any type of telescopes, there's a couple of other things to keep in mind. Yes, you can get the telescope, but does it come with eyepieces? Fortunately, with these particular three telescopes I've looked at, they also give the option of different eyepiece kits that go with the telescope. So you don't have to randomly guess, oh, will this eyepiece work with this particular telescope? The companies say, oh, here, if you can also look over here, and these particular eyepieces will go with this telescope if you're interested. Also, you need to look for a spotting scope of some kind, because it's hard and difficult to be able just to aim the telescope by itself to pinpoint towards an object. So often astronomers have a little small telescope mounted on top of the bigger telescope to point at the object and then to focus it in the big telescope. So as you can see, like for example, with the Orion Star Blast, it comes with a little spotting scope. In fact, one of the spotting scopes or pointers that I often use is called a Telrad. It's a unique little box that you turn it on and it creates a bullseye. And you literally just put the object in the middle of the bullseye. Easy to use. And the other thing to do is make sure it comes with a case. These three in particular come with a nice box and or a case of some kind, like a zip-up bag as well. So that makes them easy to make it portable. So these are just three telescopes that I personally recommend and I've used before, and they are really great little telescopes for beginner astronomy. If you're looking for something a little more complex, you can go to these individual telescope companies. They will be able to happily help you with whatever telescope you're looking for and what you plan to use. I've worked with all three companies in the past and they are great. If you have any questions or any comments, leave them down in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Or if you have any other suggestions for telescopes, I'm pretty sure other people would love to hear about it. Leave those down in the comments below as well. If you have any topics for future Mini Sky Tonights, let me know. And until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and as always, never stop learning. See you guys soon.